Today on the Self Smarter podcast.
When you understand your blind spots, we're able to accept them for what they are, if we are truly wanting to do the work that's necessary. And we can live consciously and notice when we're behaving in a certain way that is indicative of a blind spot. Mm-hmm. And we can turn those blind spots into bright spots. Hi, we're Danelle and Megan, the hosts of this conversation-centric podcast for leaders seeking to be better every day. Whether you choose to be a leader in the workplace, at home, or in your community, we believe the most effective leaders are equipped to not only be self-starters, but self-smarter.
Hello and welcome to Self Smarter. I'm Megan and this is my friend and co-host Danelle.
Hello everyone and happy fall, y'all.
Happy fall. It's pumpkin season. Yay.
Right.
So we have some good stuff to get into today, and we know based on analytics and people listening to our podcast that people tend to be drawn to content about the Enneagram.
Well, good. That's a good sign.
That is a good sign because self-awareness is in the house.
That's absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have lengthy conversations. I mean, I'm not talking like, when I say lengthy, I don't mean like we're going to go over an hour or anything.
No.
But what I mean is we're going to get deep into a 2-part series, which starts today. And so we're going to talk about blind spots for your Enneagram type. So buckle up, buttercups, because we're going to get into some good stuff. And if you're going through the Enneagram process right now, like if you've just started it, or if you're in it, I think we're going to potentially go deeper than maybe you're used to.
Yes, for sure. And I think this is just part of the journey with the Enneagram. What we tend to do is we want to focus on the fun parts.
I know.
All this.
Ooh, let's talk about the good. Yeah. And it is good.
All of it's good.
All of it's good.
If you think about being in complete awareness,
yes,
you have to also know what's good, and you also have to know what you could potentially be blind to.
Right. And so the word du jour is blind spot.
Yeah, so if you want to play a drinking game.
Today's the day. Because we're going to say that thing, I don't even know how many times.
A lot.
So just brace, bear with us.
Yes.
And brace for blind spots because they're coming.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Danelle, the reason why we want to talk about this today is because we're both learning a lot.
Yes.
About blind spots. Particularly you. You mentioned this a lot, so I'm not like blowing your cover or anything, but you're in therapy.
I am.
And so you're learning a lot about this. And this is part of the impetus of why we wanted to do this today.
Yeah, I think, again, this is not the first time I've been in therapy, but I'm in a different kind of therapy now. I'm seeing a neuropsychologist. And so I'm learning not just about my emotions, which is typical for therapy, but I'm also learning about how our emotions impact our mind and vice versa. So it's enthralling me.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to say it's not rough some days, but it's also intriguing to me. And then as we, talk more about the Enneagram, I started to realize there's just a lot of that study that I personally did, 8 years ago on that, when we started the journey relative to my poor approval rating as a leader. We've used the Enneagram as one of the tools for, at least I have, and then now we have as an organization to be the best version of ourselves. But I used it primarily relative to my leadership, like what I learned about myself as a leader and, quite frankly, a mother of a teenager.
Same,
who,
yes.
Now I have a 22-year-old. So in this season of my life, as I, flew into 50, thinking it was going to be all a big party, I found myself needing to really, think about things really embrace the negative parts of feelings as well. And I'm not someone who's done a really great job with that. So I sought some help. And then I also started to realize, as you and I have continued to study the Enneagram and in this company as a team, that there's a lot that we potentially kind of ignored in that study, and blind spots, at least I did.
Yeah.
I didn't spend a lot of time in the blind spot chapter.
Right. Yeah, no, it's not fun.
No.
It can be perceived as not fun because it's hard to swallow some of those pills because, which you're going to talk about in a little bit, the definition of a blind spot.
Right.
And I'll just say this, it can be some things that we tend to not see that others can see.
Correct.
Yeah, so that makes it difficult.
Yeah, it's Until we decide that it's not. Until we decide that it's empowering and that we all share this in common. I don't feel alone in this, which was why I wanted to really elevate this in the podcast as I'm going through this journey myself, more so on a personal level. And I think it's important. And so that's why we chose to dive right into this lovely topic of blind spots. So.
And we will dive right in right after this commercial. Okay, so you've heard us talk about the work we do at DMA. Let me tell you something. One of the best products our team can build for a business is a custom messaging guide. This high-level document spells out the story of your business so it's easy for your customers to grasp and ignites curiosity in their minds about how your products and services can truly make a difference in their business. The best part of all, we do them for a flat fee. They have become one of our best-selling products in 2022, and we'd love to get one in the works for your business. Send an email to info@dma-solutions.com and we'll set up a call to get your messaging guide in the works. Okay, let's get naked and talk about something super uncomfortable for people.
Like getting naked.
Kind of, you know what I mean. We're really talking about blind spots, but naked in the emotional sense.
Correct. Yeah, so what we want to do is we really want to have our listeners and ourselves, quite frankly, walk away today with understanding our blind spots as it pertains to the Enneagram. I think it'd be easy to just talk about blind spots in general in the workplace or in your personal life, but we are going to break it down based on your Enneagram. So if you don't know that number, you might want to take a pause and go ahead and go to the Enneagram Institute and give yourself the best $12 gift you could ever give yourself and take the assessment. And so for those of you who have, this will be just almost a next level 2-part series that we're going to have. But what we're trying to do is when you understand your blind spots, we're able to accept them for what they are if we are truly wanting to do the work that's necessary. And we can live consciously and notice when we're behaving in a certain way that is indicative of a blind spot. And we can turn those blind spots into bright spots, which is what you have coined for us today.
Now, I'm not saying I didn't completely make that up. That could be out there. But for this episode, we wanted to talk about the juxtaposition between blind spots and bright spots. So if I'm living my life one way with these blind spots, when I'm in awareness of those, what do those look like? And that's the bright spot. So first things first, let's start by defining what a blind spot is.
Okay, so we looked up several definitions, and as you can imagine, there's multiple ways to look at it, but the one that we like is this most simple. Shocker. I know. Is that a blind spot is information about you that you don't know, but others do or probably know. So in some cases, especially with me, y'all tend to flat out know. So it's something that it's called blind
for a reason.
And it's things that you're not necessarily when you're potentially in stress or even and sometimes just not, but the way that you're just wired to show up, you can fail to see these things about yourself. And that's where, we're big proponents of self-knowledge is getting to know oneself. But where the magic comes in is when you evolve into awareness, and awareness is a two-way street. It's hard to be aware of anything about yourself unless you're engaging with other people. Yeah. And so this is, an important part of that journey.
Right. And we can talk about that, and we will, because we just can't help ourselves. But when we talk about Enneagram 9, which I am, just as a reminder, and Danelle is an Enneagram 7. So obviously we have more experience with those two. So we can talk a little bit more openly. And we will tell you about our experiences in helping each other see blind spots for those particular Enneagram types. So with that, let's get into the Enneagram types. There are different Enneagram types and different blind spots for each. So let's unpack those.
All right. We're going to not only do the blind spots, but also the bright spots. Yes. So what we're going to do is, if you've listened to any of our episodes on Enneagram, we like to start with the number 9. So if you're thinking of the Enneagram image, 9 is at the top. So if it's if the Enneagram diagram is semblance of a clock, 9's at the top.
Like so 12.
So we like to start with our peacemakers, our type 9s. So 3s, please pay attention because this is where you go in stress. So blind spots for the 9s are anger, frustration, and stubbornness. Passive aggressive display of anger, misseeing the value in conflict, and the need for healthy boundaries with others. So,
yeah, I mean, as a peacemaker, these are, you know, obviously not fun to hear and very true.
Nope.
But what I love about the blind spots is the third one that you mentioned, we tend to miss seeing the value in conflict, which took me 46 years to figure out
Right.
as a 46-year-old.
Right.
So that I love this. This is perfect.
Well, I think too, it's a mindset where the nines need to, and I had to learn this,
Yeah.
you know, working with you is it doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Right.
It can literally be,
We're just wired that way.
but tell me what your opinion is, and it's okay if it's opposite of mine.
Well,
or tell me.
That's a problem. We don't have opinions. We literally don't.
You do. You don't know how to necessarily always access them.
Okay. I can say, and you know, please, nines, if you're listening and you want to chime in here, and if you think I'm wrong, we'd love to hear that. But everybody, you know, to each their own. But for me, I don't necessarily have an opinion. I have to pull in data points from others. I love hearing opinions of others and form my own decision versus an opinion. I don't think of it as an opinion.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think we're getting into semantics here, but but the fact is that nines have to, when they're in growth, they're more conscious of their own opinions and making conscious decisions.
Yeah.
And so without the help of others.
Right.
And so that's where you are in growth. So speaking of that, let's talk about the bright spots.
Okay.
So nines become more direct by getting in touch with their anger and articulating emotions.
Correct.
Versus sitting on that stuff and then erupting one day.
Well, and which I will say for you as my leader and knowing this about nines, you'll say, okay, you know, like if I'm emoting and you'll say, okay, you sound, how are you feeling? And I'll be like, oh, I'm angry. And you'll be like, okay, well, this just doesn't seem like something you might be angry about. Like, what are you really angry about? And then you can help me pull that out.
Right.
Which I would normally not be able to do. So that's a helpful tip for people listening who know nines in their lives, especially if you're coaching a nine, leading a nine.
Yes.
Pull it out.
And it took me a while to figure that out.
I know.
I was just frustrated for a while.
I know.
And we'll talk about that too. But other bright spots for nines, they're able to notice when passive aggressive behaviors are in play with themselves and others. Because they can, you know, they can be prey to that as well as they can inflict it.
Yeah. And like, oh, look at that passive aggressive. That was swift.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They're able to communicate more clearly about what they want and how they feel. They're able to utilize constructive conflict as a way to develop stronger relationships. And again, that's what we were speaking to earlier in terms of our relationship as it relates to the business and being co-leaders. You know, that's something we had to work on because you would avoid the conflict and I would just go for the jugular.
Right. Two opposites.
And we'll talk about that when we get to the eights with my 8-wing. And so the other bright spot is you're able to balance connecting with people and also saying no, or also being able to set some boundaries.
Yeah. Or just like, here's what we can do, or here's what I can do versus just going along to get along.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you really brought that to our organization. I don't know, maybe it's a passive aggressive tactic, but
it's just positive.
Yeah. You brought yes. And I think that was a comfortable way for you to be able to say, not necessarily no.
Right.
But, and I can say as being on the receiving end of you using that tactic with me is that saying no to me sometimes is for you, I don't know if the right word's intimidating, but it's not something you enjoy doing.
Anybody.
And so, you to anyone. Are you saying anybody to me?
Oh, no. I don't like to say no to anybody.
Correct. I don't either. But yes, and, you know, allows us to be able to give the reference points that one might need to consider with the ask potentially. So I don't know. I just think that was that's when I could really see you in growth as a 9 and using your bright spots is when you learned how to use that language and not be debilitated or paralyzed by no.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, all right. Good stuff on the 9s. And all right, now let's move on to type 1.
The reformer.
Our reformers. Yes. 7s, pay attention because here's where we head first into stress. So our blind spots, or the one's blind spots, are repressed anger and their effects. the impact of criticism on others.
Their
impact.
Yeah.
Yes. Ones can suppress emotions like sadness, pain, or enthusiasm, or behavioral impulses due to judging themselves as
So
inappropriate.
you said this, they're the most critical of themselves.
By far.
Yeah.
Ones have a very negative voice in their heads, and it's on constant loop. And I can tell you that we have several ones in the office, and they can attest to that.
Yeah.
And I can tell you the same thing as when I'm in stress. That's exactly what's going on. There's a lot of negative talk to the point where I wouldn't talk to you that way, but I speak to myself that way, and that's certainly something I'm working on. The ones also, when they are in a blind spot, is the downside of relentless pursuit of perfectionism.
Which I think plays into the last one that you were just talking about. So the judgment, the being hard on yourself is because of the ability to want to be so perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then their other blind spot is the need for relaxation and enjoyment.
In other words, they don't even see it.
They don't see the need for it because they almost will not give themselves permission because that almost seems imperfect. So
I can't be tired.
Right, exactly. I have to be able to do all the things at all the levels.
Tiring.
Yeah, it
Just
is.
thinking about it for me for a 9.
Makes you want to go take a nap.
Yes.
All right, so moving on to the bright spots or bright sides for the type 1s is that they're able to enable clear communication and freedom from stress and guilt. So it's a lot of the antidote to the blind spots for the ones is permission.
That's right. Freedom was the key word there that I loved.
Absolutely. And they have the ability, again, when they're in a healthy mode, ability to address what makes them angry instead of presenting it as an irritation, criticism, or annoyance. And they can often avoid, when they're in this healthy spot, being self-righteous, which
self-righteous is a good word.
Yeah, and because it's a blind spot, and so when you realize that it's when you can see it, you can catch yourself and go, wait a minute, I'm sitting in a moment of criticism, either of myself or others. Ones, when they're in health, they are free and more relaxed expression of feelings, so they can feel their feelings and impulses
And
a little
talk
bit
about
more.
it.
Absolutely. In fact, what's interesting is the 1 goes to 7 in growth.
Yes.
So that is something that they can express all of their feelings. We know 7s get tripped up on the negative ones, but they are more free. The 1s are, and quite frankly, they have more fun.
Yeah.
When they
Best part.
Yeah, when they're all lit up and bright.
And who doesn't love a 1 in growth?
No, a 1.
The best.
They are.
Speaking of, we just saw one. I mean, now we're going to jump to that, but we just saw one this last weekend.
We did. Brandy Carlisle is
a 1 in growth all the time.
No, she's a type 1. And she's in 7 when she's growing,
Well, I know
which is
that's
the
what I mean.
entertainer. Yeah.
She's in that growth all the time.
Well, she is as an entertainer, but as a songwriter, she's in
4 mode. Yeah.
4 mode.
Feeling
just
it.
Feeling all the feelings. So it's just an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to type 2, the helper. 4s pay attention. This is where you go in stress. So blind spots viewing helping as a strategic and not just altruistic. So instead of helping someone as being truly just for the sake of helpfulness,
Right.
there's an alternative motive. And so they can, when they aren't realizing it, expect something in return.
Yeah, this is
so
hard.
giving a gift or doing something in favor for someone, there's this underlying expectation of receiving something back. And it's the Achilles heel of the two. And they also have to pay attention to how supporting others may be manipulation or a bid for power. And I know that's hard for the 2s. We have 2s in our lives that we desperately love and definitely on this team. And when the word manipulation is just ew.
It's yucky.
No one wants to think that they do it. Of course, we're all capable of it. However, 2s do it from a place of wanting to be loved.
Yes.
So when you know that about a 2, it's a little bit easier to swallow and to help them when they're in that blind spot moment.
That's right.
And so I don't know that they sit down and go, today I want to manipulate someone. No. But they can just absolutely do that in need of their need to be seen.
It's an unconscious way.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Of needing to be loved. Yeah.
They can also, in blind spots, they can fail to address their own needs and for sake of others, which
That's
is
right.
honestly, it's one of the things that can be most beautiful about a 2, especially if they're in your
Drop
life.
everything.
Yes,
Come to the
could rescue to their own detriment.
That's right.
And this is definitely something my daughter is definitely a quintessential 2, Mackie Payton. And this is something that she's had to work on. And it's one of the reasons, if you listen to the episode where Mackie was our guest, she talked about that. And this is one of the things that she worked on in therapy, was going to get tools to be able to help her
manage that.
Yeah. You know, whether they were verbal tools or actually exercises. So other blind spots are dependency on others. And then the need to be more important than they actually are. Now, I want everyone to understand that that particular blind spot, we're all important.
Yes.
But they can create this false sense of, if I'm not around, if I'm not the one to do it, it's not going to be done in the right way, especially if they have a strong wing 1.
That's right.
And so this can be, you know, a blind spot for them. So moving on to the bright spots, 2s can balance their focus on others with awareness of their own needs, feelings, and priorities. And that's so beautiful when you see that happen.
That's right.
Yeah, it's so healthy. They're able to improve communication by being more honest, direct, and conscious about their motives.
I'm asking for this because I truly want this person to enjoy it versus I'm doing this for something in return.
Correct. They view emotional sensitivity and empathy as a strength. Because 2s can get kind of a bad label, no different than 4s, of being a little bit too emotional. And certainly living with one all of these years, I can see that. And when they're able to lean into it, is, no, that's my superpower. The fact that I am attuned to my emotions is a good thing.
That's right.
Especially when their mother's a 7. Okay. They become more intentional about offering help to others and learning to say no.
Right.
So again, I think all Enneagram types have their own work to do with boundaries.
Yes.
And theirs tend to be very similar to the 9 that we talked about earlier. And then when they're in their brightness, they own their own power while demonstrating humility. You don't always have to be the center of attention. And so it's interesting, especially for our 2s around the office with the work that we do on Hungry, Humble, Smart. Often they're working on their humility.
That's right.
And it doesn't mean that they're not gracious people. But in the work setting, they're learning to not be like, oh, shucks, like almost a false humility. So it's so interesting to see that dynamic with our 2s. All right, moving on to type 3, the achiever. I mean, just that description alone begs that there's some blind spots that we probably need to work on. So 6, pay attention, because this is where you go and stress. So 3s can be blind to their own and others' feelings. And they fail often when they're in blindness to their real self, their what they really desire, their opinions and spontaneous emotions. They like to really focus on their image or their work identity. And so they can fail to be, quite frankly, authentic. They're their most true, authentic selves. They can fail to value the importance of slowing down and how their impatience gets in the way of their authentic connection with others, because they move at a high speed. They're the achiever for a reason. And then they can fail to see the importance of emotions and relationship, in particular as it relates to work. And then they can fail to see the potential value of their own ability to be transparent about failure with others. They don't like to admit that
I failed.
Moving on to the bright sides for the 3s. They're able, when they're in health, to use emotions as an important guidance and are able to access their real self. They're able to base decisions and goals based on who they really are versus an image of how they want to be seen. Again, they're able to lean into their authentic selves. Yes. 3s allow more time to think things through and relate to others before moving on to the next task. And then they are also able to balance relationships and work goals and the value of cultivating relationships as much as achievements or task or completion of task. So again, and finally, when they're in their brightness, they embrace failures as learning experiences.
Yeah, that would be, if I'm leading 3s, that last thing that you just said would be the indicator that we're working together well. because we've identified that we're not using we're failing, and we can accept that, or we've made a mistake.
Yeah,
It doesn't have to
failures.
be like a failure, but
failures
like just something simple. Like I've made a mistake, and they will argue tooth and nail about why it's not.
Correct. And, to defend it, whereas...
Well, here's why I did it, and which is fine. And as your leader, I'm telling you that next time you need to try it like this. So then instead, when they're coming back, they'll say, I did this. It did not work. I learned from it, and I'm not going to do it again.
Yeah, it's interesting that both the 1s and the 3s suffer from an interesting version of perfectionism.
Yeah, they do.
And so, again, when you're in awareness of that potentially creeping in is when, for the 3, when they're unable to see, like you said, a mistake or a misstep or just something that didn't perform well. It may not be a mistake.
No.
It could just be, you know what, we wanted this outcome and we fell short of that. It's okay.
That's right.
What can we do next time? And being comfortable with that.
Comfortable.
And I think that's the key for the 3s. All right. Moving on to our sweet type 4s, the individualist. And so pay attention, 1, because here's where you go on stress. So the blind spots. 4s have a hard time seeing what's going well in the present situation. And I'm going to borrow this word. This is not my description, but we follow a very famous 4, Glennon Doyle. So she can describe herself proudly,
Yes.
often, and on the regular as being moody.
Yes.
So that's her word.
It's okay.
It's okay.
People can be moody.
Yes. And 4s own when they're in their blind spots, when what they may not be able to see is that their own positive qualities and strengths.
Yeah. They can't even see the happy, the good.
The good, yeah. So they struggle with that. They also struggle with having over-identification with their emotions and potentially negative effects of this, like just sitting with the emotion and not being able to get beyond it. And so that can have its own version of a negative effects, as I'm learning in therapy. And so the potential consequences of comparing themselves to others, that's where they can be in when they're in their blindness.
Well, why can't I be that way? Or why can't I have that? Yeah.
Exactly. And then they can also go so inward that they have a hard time connecting to the outside world. So that is, speaking of Glennon, I mean, that's honestly where it's a blind spot for her, but it's almost where she has to go to create, like to be able to write.
Yeah.
To be able to do her thing, she sometimes has to sit in a bit of the blindness in order to create her art. Brandi Carlile's the same way. You listen to Brandi Carlile's lyrics, that's not someone, that's hanging out in their growth. Yeah. She's in her 7 as a 1 when she's on stage, but clearly when she's writing music that impacts our hearts and souls, she's tapping into her 4. And so she's having to go inward, which when we understand our blind spots, we can use them to our advantage. So speaking of that, let's transition into the bright spots for 4s. They are able to, when in their brightness, they're able to balance what's missing with an awareness of what is present and positive in the here and now. They are able to develop greater confidence by owning their gifts and strengths, which is something interesting they have in connection with the 2s. They draw on wisdom of their emotions while also being objective, analytical, and practical, because they can live in a
kind of idealistic.
Yeah, idealistic. Yeah, and I wouldn't say imaginary. Yeah, idealistic is a much better descriptor there. So, also 4s, when they're in health, can be aware and intentional about how they position themselves with regards to others, being more considerate. They can tend to be a bit dismissive if you're not sitting in the stuff with them. You're not feeling enough with me. We're not in the feelings.
That's right.
Yeah. And they can also, when they're in health, avoid being distracted or hooked by specific emotions, and they understanding deeper motives.
Right. So I'm not going to sit in this.
Correct. I'm going to own it.
Own it.
Because the 7s have a lot to learn from the 4s, because the 4s are like in their emotions, and 7s we're like running for the
hills.
And if it's anything but the happy ones.
Right.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a sec. Yeah. All right, moving on to the type 5, the investigator. So 8s, pay attention. Here's where you head in stress. So the blind spots for the 5s are the lack of value of emotion and emotional engagement. They lack the value of connecting to others through personal disclosure. they are often blinded to the way that relationships can provide support and enhance energy, not drain it. And they can also be a bit selfish with their time, space, energy, and other resources. And so it's an interesting, as a 7, I go to 5 in growth, and because we can be scattered. And so when I think about the blind spots of the 5, it's almost I have to access some of their blind spots in order to be in my most healthy state as a 7.
Interesting.
Because distraction is one of the things that we tend to struggle with. So 5s, and this is stated in multiple resources, if you're into studying the Enneagram at all, that 5s are the most often misunderstood. Mm-hmm. And they can tend to just be very inward with their thoughts or ideas. So 8s, like I said, need to pay specific attention because this is where they go in stress. They can just recoil and go into hibernation, and also, for 6s with a 5 wing, this is also something to pay attention to as well. So with their brightness, our 5s are able to balance intellectual analysis with being more connected to their emotional responses, so that they're able to use both their mind and heart to show up as their best version of themselves. Right. They share more about themselves as a way of being known and creating stronger bonds with people. They deepen relationships and enhance connection by developing a greater capacity to talk about emotions with others. And 5s are able to have more energy and inner resources through working against a scarcity mentality. So I thought that was very interesting, is that we've had 1 5 on our team, and it was interesting to see how they could live, and they used analytics as a way to almost validate the scarcity mindset. So it was interesting, and this was a young individual on our team, as they were coming into their own maturity, to watch them kind of almost grapple with this and become stronger and brighter in these moments. And we were able to, not having worked much with 5s, able to kind of help coach and lead them. So, all right, moving on to type 6, the loyalist. 9s, pay attention, because here's where you hang out when you're stressed out.
I'm listening.
Good. Okay, blind spots. So 9s own fear and how it drives their behavior in ways they do not see, often acting suspiciously or with mistrust. Mm-hmm. So they, again, and I'm not going to get into the triads, but fear is their main, the aspect of themselves that guides most of their decision is fear. They can, again, in their blindness, they can, in their own power, trust their own judgment and authority over all others. Mm-hmm. So they tend to go inward and go, I'm the only authority or opinion that can matter. They have a tendency to project fears onto others and then assume ill intent in a way that negatively impacts a relationship. I know that's tough to hear. I have a 6 wing, so it's tough for me sitting here also. And they have a problem understanding what is working well. So they fail to see the positive data in the situation. It's easy to focus on what's missing and or what's not working so well. Mm-hmm. And then they're also, in their blindness, they struggle with the ability to have faith that things will work out.
Right. And I mean,
they can give up quickly.
Right. They do. And I am married to a 6. I know I've said that multiple times. So as a 9, where I go in stress, I'm able to identify when my husband's in blind spot mode. And all these things that you just said, I'll be like, well, what about the positive aspects? Can we list those? Like if we're talking about, I don't know, taking a walk in the rain, something, he's like, well, we're going to slip, we're going to fall, we could slide down. The whole, thing could start to slide, and then I don't know what's going to happen to your shoes. Like any little thing can be turned into this bigger deal. And I'm like, but let's think about the positive aspects. It'll be fun.
Right.
We'll be happy. We'll laugh. If we slide, so what? I'll buy new shoes. I win.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too, all of this is when we're blinded, because
they don't know.
We love 6s for their discernment.
Yeah.
Believe me, as a 7, I need some 6s around, because I only see, I can be in a mode of only seeing the bright side to my extreme detriment. And so again, our blind spots are when we're coming from a place of unawareness and potentially unhealthiness.
Yes.
And so, all right, moving on to the bright sides for the 6s. When they're in brightness, they're able to create a deeper understanding of their fears and therefore are able to take courageous, intentional action in the face of their fears.
Wonderful. Let's walk in the rain.
Yes, absolutely. They stop projecting power and authority onto others and they own it more themselves. So in other words, 6s, when they're in health, become more accountable to their own actions. They see both problems and opportunities. They're able to be decisive and take action in a timely manner. They're able to balance healthy skepticism with more faith and trust. And they're able to provide solutions and not just tell others why their ideas won't work.
Right. Meaning their own ideas and or your ideas.
Yeah, yes.
Like, here's why all this isn't going to work.
Exactly. And they're also able in health, certainly to be able to point out what might, but
the
they're also
discernment, to your
able,
point.
they're able to see both sides. So
And it's like a balance of healthy discernment.
correct.
You know what? Okay, let's look at both sides. Let's look at the good. Let's look at the not so good.
Right. All righty.
Dear 7.
Dear 7, our enthusiast. And so 5s, pay attention because here's where you head in stress. So us 7s, we tend to focus on pleasure as a way of avoiding pain and as a result, create more pain.
Now, did you put this down because are these
Because my
personal
therapist said
things?
it. Because my therapist says
Yes.
it at the beginning of every
So
session.
focus on pleasure as a way of avoiding pain, and as a result, create more pain. That's really hard to hear.
It's hard. It is absolutely hard. And, you know, there's a lot that goes into that I'm learning. And I think when I was in the mode of using the Enneagram to become a better leader, you know, I faced the pain head on. I knew what I needed to work on. It took, and it has taken, and it will always be something I'm working on. But from a personal aspect of things I'm working through now as a 50-year-old woman who has a lot of things happening in her life, and we've talked extensively about it on the podcast, it's because of the avoidance of pain, you just cause more pain because you never, it just sits there and it lingers.
Right.
And the negative impacts on your mind and body are
Take a
not,
toll.
they take a toll. And that's honestly why I took literally the bull by the horns this go around relative to my own mental and emotional health and said, I'm not going to be victim to these things that are
I know
absolutely,
myself, really.
yeah. I mean, honestly, and you know, I'm okay with it. I don't feel like I'm alone in this.
You're not.
And so, yeah, so 7s, this is kind of our Achilles heel. I mean, and these other things are real too, the other blind spots, but that's definitely our largest one. We struggle with negative data inherent to a situation.
Yeah, you won't like see the good stuff.
No, we only want to see sparkles,
Right, which is
and
why
glitter.
we work
Exactly.
as a good working team, because I got discernment on my side, and that's 6, scary 6.
Yes, absolutely. And we tend to struggle with our deeper emotions related to discomfort or anxiety. We struggle to understand what's meaningful in the present moment versus living in the future. You know, you and I just went to a concert. We got to see a concert 2 days in a row, and I had to consciously prepare myself before and during that amazing show. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in a future episode. But I had to be conscious of being present. I had to not think on Friday night. I had to not make sure I didn't get excited about Saturday
Tomorrow
night.
night, yeah.
And then on Saturday night, I had to make sure that I was just sitting in the moment with that full moon and our favorite artist and enjoying it all versus, oh, this is going to be over tomorrow. It's going to be so sad. Sucks. Yuck. Like, and so it's something that we have to work on. So that was, you know, again, trying to not be blind in that moment.
Wow.
And then 7s, we miss the potential and the value of limitations. So we can learn to develop the flexibility to work within constraints instead of needing to push for freedom. So this is, again, one of the things that we long for as 7s is freedom, because it's freedom, quite frankly, from our own fear. So whereas 6, we're in the fear triad. So 5, 6s, and 7s, we're in our center of intelligence is fear. Well, 6s internalize it. 7s externalize it. So we're getting the hell away from it. So it's just an interesting dynamic.
It is. I also think there's a correlation here. you said that 7s miss the potential to see the value of limitations, like 9s miss seeing the value of conflict.
Yes.
So it's that thing that we're avoiding. So what I'm hearing you say is 7s avoid boundaries, limitations.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
And when they're not healthy, absolutely. And we
Okay.
can just be absolutely, for lack of a better word, blind to it.
Yep.
All right. So let's move on to the bright spots. Thank goodness. Jeez,
We made it.
Get out of that darkness. 7s, we're able to embrace the experience of pleasure as well as pain as the experience of living. And we understand fully that it is the beauty of both what feels great, so the pleasure as well as the pain, that makes the total experience whole, and really is what living is about. Because how can you honestly, and I'm still learning this at 50 years old, that sometimes the pain leads us to a more enhanced version of pleasure and joy, and it's still an aha for me.
Yeah, good.
Admittedly.
I think that's good.
Admittedly.
Something I want to say and just give you kudos here on the podcast for all to hear is the way that you've been able to experience pain. I mean, you turned 50, you kind of prepared all of us, like I'm going through kind of something here. And you're telling us all and sharing very openly that you're going through therapy. So clearly you're working on things. What I have noticed lately is your ability to be free. So congratulations, 7, with your emotions, your negative emotions. And that shows up to me as crying. Like we may be in a business meeting. It's not funny. I'm trying not to laugh, but I know it's funny. But we may be in a business meeting now and you just might start crying.
Well,
I mean, it's because there's something... You have realized something, or we have realized something, and so it's kind of like pride.
it is pride.
And learning about yourself and
Yes.
feeling a certain way, probably like triggered from the therapy you're getting, and going, "Oh, that is so right! Like
Yes.
this is happening right now."
Yes.
And so I'm just appreciative of it because we don't
thank you.
wonder.
No.
There's no wondering.
No, it's all out there.
And Danelle's not always the chipper chicken. Like she's not always walking around here like, woohoo.
No.
You know, sometimes she gets sad.
Yes. Yes.
And she's leaning into that, and isn't that growth?
Yes, that is absolutely. Thank you for that. I appreciate that acknowledgement.
So just cry on, girl.
It's not always crying.
No,
No.
but you'd cry.
I mean, I've always been a tenderhearted person. So anytime I'm like giving accolades
That's
to
true.
someone, or I see
there's
an
a difference.
an
though.
animal's involved, I'm crying.
There's a difference.
I know. I just want to make that declaration that I think tears are
Even
good.
your crying is different.
Let's do a whole episode on
Let's
that.
do a whole different types of crying.
Okay, let's keep moving on
Okay.
here. All right. 7s, we develop the ability to tolerate discomfort and limitation as valuable indicators of what is real.
And there it is.
And there it is.
The tears.
Yes. We understand that it's just as problematic to focus on only the positive data as it would be to only focus on the negative.
Yeah, let's give some.
Yeah.
Let's get a little bit of both.
So the 6s have to work on one aspect
That's
of
right.
meeting halfway, and the 7s to the other extent. 7s, we develop the ability to be imaginative while dealing with constraints. And we slow down and sink more into the present moment without distractions. So 7s, we go to 5 in growth. And that's what these last two bright spots are pointing out, is that we have the ability to focus and create magic. And why are you laughing?
I just have an example of this, like a recent example that I can literally like pull from yesterday.
Okay.
So I'm having a marketing meeting with our DMA team. And they go, well, because we send out a calendar like every year to all the people who we love and that follow our podcast, or sorry, not our podcast, our blog.
Right.
And we'd love to send any listeners a calendar for 2023 that's in the works. That's what we were talking about, the
Okay.
2023 calendar. And they were like, well, Danelle had mentioned she wanted to do all Broadway, a Broadway version of a calendar. So this is an example of a 7 who's just kind of like, ooh, I like Broadway. Let's do a whole Broadway calendar. Never mind what might be logical for the business
The business, yeah.
or anything else. So they were like, As somebody said in the meeting, I mean, I love Broadway. I'm the first one to sit on the front row too, but I just don't know how the Broadway thing like aligns with our audience. And it was the perfect thing because then we were able to come up with the pitch that we pitched to you, and you were like, yes, which is a calendar for all of you.
Yes.
Who are listening. And so anyway, sevens have an incredible ability to make things so fun. Like, who doesn't want a Broadway calendar? You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that's the thought process, but the discernment, that's when the leveling out comes into play.
And healthy sevens accept that
Feedback,
lovely idea.
Yeah.
Probably, I don't even remember saying I wanted a Broadway calendar, so that's just fun. At being 50, I can just forget. I can forget all my shiny object
Well, you
ideas.
had been in New York, I think, and then you came back all jazzed.
Of course.
Of course. That's what I said.
And I have a child.
She's not literal, guys.
Well, we are doing a calendar when Mackie Payton hits Broadway.
Well, then we'll do it.
Maybe I should just do personal calendars.
There's a good idea.
That's a good idea. All right, moving on to type 8, our challengers. 2s, pay attention because here's where you head in stress. So blind spots, they're blind to their own weaknesses and expressing vulnerability. They tend to miss limitations to their power and strength, seeing cases where taking a softer approach might be more effective. Like they miss the opportunity to see those potential approaches. They can be blind to the negative effects of being too action-oriented, and they can often be surprised how they intimidate others. And it's big. And Mackenzie is, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know that she's an 8, and this is something in her leadership journey that I've had to work with her on because I receive that feedback a lot. And so I think when
the feedback you're receiving is that you intimidate people.
Yes, correct. Okay. And she and I both have to sit with that, and it makes us both very uncomfortable because we know our hearts, we know, but what we're failing to see sometimes is how we're showing up in a particular situation, which is hence, 10 years ago, the 26% approval rating. I think I was sitting in my 8 wing
maybe
in a little bit of a blindness back then, being a little too direct, being a little bit, abrasive, and not communicating in a way that exhibited empathy and I sure as hell wasn't listening very well. And still working on that, by the way. But this is, something that I can certainly empathize with the 8s on is we can be labeled as, oh, she's just intimidating, especially women who are 8s.
Yeah.
So it's something to be aware of. If you've been told that, what I would encourage is to continue to work towards identifying those moments when, ask thoughtful questions. If someone's giving you that feedback, seek to find out why that is, because I ran from that for years.
Right. You mean ask
the question.
Specifically.
Ask.
What made you think
exactly.
that? Like, why do you think that?
Exactly. So
you used to ask me that, but I didn't have an answer. Well, I'm not intimidated by you or Mackenzie.
Right, but it bothers us both to get that feedback.
Both
and so
of you. It's hurtful.
It's hurtful.
Especially, I mean, I can't speak for you, but I know it's hurtful to you. Y'all just process it in different ways, but she really... It's like she goes, I'm like, I don't even mean to, and I don't even try. Like, what am I doing?
That's why it's called a blind spot.
Right.
And that's why we work on them.
Right.
So 8s also can misunderstand their impact on others, and they may apply too much pressure or have a negative effect that they may not intend through being too direct, strong, or assertive.
And I'm guessing that those are the 3 reasons why, when you ask somebody, why are you intimidated? They're probably going to say assertiveness or just, you're kind of coming at me, aggressiveness.
Yeah, and I think there's a thin line.
Direct.
Right, because if you're an 8 or 7 with an 8 wing, or, you can say, I'm just self-confident.
Yes.
I mean, which is probably the case.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that we don't have a blind spot
to it,
to how we're showing up.
To others.
To others.
Yes.
And so there's a way to sit in confidence and not piss off everybody in the room.
That's right.
And I that's something that...
That's a really good point. And my son is also, I think, an 8, and that is his biggest thing. He's like, Mom, I do not read the room well. Like he's in self-awareness.
He's 15,
just
by the way, coming up on 16.
Yes.
So he's ahead of in my opinion, self-awareness.
When you have a child growing up in this lifestyle, we talk about this stuff all the time. But yeah, he's like, Mom, I don't read the room well at all. So that's a really good point. You just struck a nerve with me when you said that.
Yeah, I think because again, watching Mackenzie and her leadership journey, I hope she's comfortable with us. I think she's comfortable with us sharing this, is to help her understand what the difference between the confidence and the knowledge that she possesses and how to utilize that to get people to want buy-in versus to kind of shun away, because it's something that took me years to figure out for myself as I journeyed forward. So
I also want to note, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to note that we are speaking soon to a large group of women.
Yes.
Okay. And
by the time this airs, we will have already given the talk.
Yes, but they, you very well might have heard Danelle and me speak.
Correct.
And most of you are 8s.
If you're listening from that audience in that event, the Southern Roots event.
That's right. So take what we're saying here. We will do a lot of work together when we're together, but take what we're saying here and really apply it. Now's the time to apply it. So as you go into the bright spots, Danelle, I just wanted to make that connection
I appreciate
for
that.
them.
Yeah, because hopefully we have a lot of new listeners from that event. So we're very excited about it, and we'll be talking about it in post recordings. So the bright spots of the 8, let's get there. They balance strength and power with awareness of their own weaknesses. They become a bit softer and more approachable via vulnerability. They moderate their tendencies to dominate or control situations. 8s are able to take the time to think and consult others before taking immediate action. They're just action oriented. And that's why there's most leaders of companies out there are 8s. And so there's a reason for that. And it can be their superpower when they're in health.
Yes.
8s develop more empathy for others by accessing more of their own emotions. And then they are able to understand the impact they have on others, recognize when they may be applying too much strength. So it's interesting because Hannah in our organization, our director of people and operations, she's an 8. And she also has to work on these things, especially as the person who's working, directly with our culture, which is made up of our people. She's having to work on some of these things as well. And I think it's interesting to watch her and Mac on this journey together because their approaches they're different.
Yeah, they are.
They're different. So they have a little bit different, they have a different style. And so it's just interesting to watch that dynamic unfold for the two of them. So
yeah, it's nice. It's nice to have 2 8s on our leadership team. I like that. I find comfort in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right, so that did it for the blind spots and the bright spots. So thank you for walking us through all those. I think, before we move on to our music moment, I wanted to mention that recently, as we're working a lot on Enneagram right now, you've been talking about kind of that move from awareness to agility. So just to wrap up our blind spots and our bright spots, why is it important for us to be living in awareness? Like, what's your hope for our audience?
My hope is that, so I think if you've listened to the podcast, you've heard me describe it, but I believe if you're looking at awareness, I think what we have to become before we're aware is knowledgeable. And that starts with us becoming more knowledgeable about ourselves. So that's kind of Enneagram 1.0 and any other assessment that you might take or any other work that you may be doing in therapy or in coaching. And I do both. Or I participate in both. So there's knowledge, like how we're wired and all that. Then there's awareness. And the awareness comes in when we're able to interact with others. Because you can't become fully aware until you're able to be in awareness with others who can help you see these blind spots. And so then from there, once we've engaged and committed to both the knowledge and the awareness, then it becomes the skill set of being agile. So I've described to you all that I'm in an agile moment. I know a lot about the Enneagram. I know a lot about myself. I know a lot about others, but I still needed to, in this season of my life, be agile and realize I needed to kind of recalibrate. I mean, I in every sense of the word. But ultimately, to answer your question, what I hope that this episode and others that we have on this topic, and quite frankly, all that we talk about here on Self Smarter, is acceptance. accepting who we are wholly, not just the good things, but the things that can trip us up. I don't even like to refer to them as dark but what they are is they're just things that we innately struggle with.
Yeah, it's like unintentional.
It is. I hope most of the time it's unintentional.
I think it is.
And I believe that. That's what I witness. And I think that's why we, again, committed to doing an episode that's not sounding too sexy, blind spots. I hope people click on it because it's great information. And this is the type of information that will transform. This is when you'll see the work. And so as you listen to this episode and you share this with those, for it to really be powerful, it's like, hey, do you mind taking in a listen to this and listen to these numbers?
Do you see this?
Do you see this blind spot in me? Now that is a sign of growth.
And trust.
And trust is to be able to say, here's
me.
Here's me. Now, right, exactly. I'm going to put the 7 blind spots on my door. So y'all can all help me and continue to help me as you have to a great deal. But yeah, that's what I intend, honestly, both of us intend for this podcast in general, but certainly these topics is to help us fully accept all of ourselves.
Sure. We are who we are.
We are who we are.
And we can always have these blind spots that are, like we said, unintentional. And then we can be very intentional about making them strengths.
Correct.
For ourselves so that we live happier, healthier lives.
Yes, that's a great way to wrap it.
Cool. Okay, so for our music moment, transition.
Yeah.
We've said therapy. We've said blind spots a lot in this episode, and we've said therapy a lot. So now we're going to say therapy more.
Okay.
Over our episodes, we have a music moment because we appreciate music so much. It's really therapeutic for us. Like we've discovered that
significantly.
Yes. Over the last 15 years, music has been it is in most of my relationships, my special relationships with people.
Same.
Yeah. So music is therapy. So what we wanted to talk about today during Music Moment is a little bit more about music as therapy and an actual profession in science.
Yes.
Because I don't think either one of us realized that we have a music therapist in our midst.
No, I didn't know that. I didn't know that profession existed until Madison, Mackenzie's sister. She studied that.
That's right.
And she is a professional.
Yes.
Music therapist.
Yes. And so
I'm sure it might be called something else, but that's what we call it.
What would have been extra neat is if we would have had her on the podcast.
No, we need to have her. Let's just have a whole episode.
We should.
Yeah.
But with that, I thought it would be fun to just kind of talk about music as therapy and or music therapy and what we've learned about it.
Yeah, I think it's just interesting to know that, again, like we said, I felt music has been therapy my whole life. So, but I would use that in a general sense.
Yes.
So if you're thinking about, it's with memory recall or with all the emotions, there's a song for it.
Yeah,
right?
like celebrations
and sadness, quite frankly, as I'm leaning into sadness.
Yeah.
It's funny though. It's funny as a 7. I'll run from sadness in my own heart, but I run towards it in music. I'll just send you the saddest song. I'll send you the saddest song that there is.
Look at this
it's interesting. And my daughter pointed that out. Mom, you like really sad music. I was like, oh, I haven't. I'm just really into lyrics. So I think that's poetry.
Yes, it is.
And it is poetry. And so it's interesting as, again, Madison, Mackenzie's sister, following this pursuit, we decided to dig in a little bit more and learn more about it. And we found a study that said over 90% of us have experienced chills down our spine when listening to music. And it just simply underlines how important and impactful music can be to the emotional state of our bodies and minds.
Yeah.
So it's not just something fun we do.
No.
It's something that actually can heal us and make us stronger. And another study from Stanford shows that music engages areas of the brain which are involved with paying attention.
Yes.
One of us needs that bad. Making predictions and updating events in our memory, which I love, which was what I was speaking to earlier in terms of the nostalgia. And sometimes that it could potentially evoke a sad emotion as well as a happy one. But when I think about it, how many of us have had that moment where that song comes on and you just are stopped in your tracks. Mm-hmm. It just takes you somewhere else. I mean, I think I would hope that that's common among all of us.
I can't imagine that it's not. Yeah. And I do want to just say that in terms of music as therapy, we've mentioned it. We're like hemming and hawing around it, but we saw Brandi Carlile recently at Red Rocks, which if you haven't been, you should go. I mean, I don't go see Brandi Carlile, good for you, but I mean, like, go to the Red Rocks. Like,
yes, it's both. It's a two-part ask.
Yeah, it's like
go see Brandi Carlile anywhere,
and go to Red Rocks.
Go see someone at Red Rocks,
right? Because it's like a geological anomaly.
I mean, literally,
that this acoustically conducive space exists in the mountains ish.
Yeah, no, that's a mountain. We were 1,000 feet up.
Yeah, we were climbing our asses. But yeah, it's up. And so we talk about where music meets nature. And this is my 9 speaking, and potentially my Capricorn as well. The moon in the sky. It was a full moon night. I mean, it was unbelievable. The therapy.
Yeah, it was one of the most therapeutic
the energy
music moments I've ever experienced.
Ever.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm talking
spiritual.
about a
it was
moment
spiritual.
in like hours.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean,
we were there for 5 hours and it didn't feel that long because it was just so good. And
we're going to talk more about it, and don't give it all away. Jeez.
Okay. Well, I'm just really excited.
Well, it was therapeutic, and that's what we're talking about.
We saw it with people we love and our friends, and my husband was there. And so it was just great. So anyway, it was very therapeutic, but that you mentioned the quote unquote, that song, you said anytime you hear that song, and there is a Brandi Carlile song
called That Song.
Anytime I hear that song, do yourself a favor for this music moment and go look up that song.
It's interesting too, because my therapist, when she'd heard that we were going to go see Brandi, she knows everything about me, and I'm learning bits and pieces about her as time goes on. And she's like, well, I'm a Brandi Carlile fan. And so what she's asked me to do as part of my therapy is when I hear a Brandi song, but I hear it differently. Because she's like, you know them all. Clearly, you are an extreme fan. And she goes, but when you hear a song that you know really well, I want you to send it to me if it's something you're hearing differently for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah, so I just sent her the song That Wasn't Me by Brandi Carlile today. And I was like, yeah, I've listened to this song 100 times, and I've never heard it the way I heard it today.
Wow.
It stopped me in my walking tracks.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it's good. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing. It makes you think differently. It makes you show up differently. And so, yeah, music is therapy, makes my heart sing.
So tell us what your music therapy acumen is like on social media. Jesse's going to have a question up in our stories, and she's just going to ask you to just...
You are listeners. She's not talking to me at this moment.
No. Yeah. And I was like, you want me to do who? No, when you're on Instagram or Facebook, we'll just DM us and let us know what song really helps you. Anyway, does it make you happy? What evokes emotion for you? Emotion, we need therapy around that. So tell us. We'd love to hear.
Absolutely.
And we will have Madison on.
Yes, we will.
Dear Madison.
I hope you're listening.
Come on the podcast?
If this is your invitation, we'll send you a legit one as well.
That's right. And we hope you learned something new about yourself today, listeners. And, definitely if you like today's episode, definitely come back next week for part 2, which will get into moving these blind spots and bright spots into action.
Absolutely.
So let's work on that, Danelle, and then come back next week and give some more of ourselves in this topic. Until then, you can visit our website, selfsmarterpodcast.com, and or give us some feedback on social media and or in comments. We'd love to hear from you. Your feedback really does help us. It helps us develop content that's important to you. And also it gives Danelle and me both inspiration just to have some fun and to serve you at the same time. And
we appreciate the ratings. They continue to come in, and just that means a lot to us. And it also helps other leaders and folks find our podcast. So thank you for supporting us in that way.
Until next week, ladies and gentlemen, we send you into the week with grateful hearts.
Goodbye, everyone. As always, you can connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at Self Smarter Podcasts. You can also leave a rating or review if you enjoyed what you heard today. Not only does this mean so much to us, but it also helps other leaders and future leaders find our community. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us in becoming self-smarter. This podcast is produced by Snacks Media, and music is from a free platform. Well, that is until Brandy Carlisle reaches out to us to write the original score for our podcast. Friends, have a great rest of your day.